He played a melody that shouldn't exist, a song I wrote in secret 25 years ago, a song only one person ever heard. I still remember the weight of her head against my shoulder. Not the polite lean of someone being affectionate. No, this was surrender. Complete. Absolute. The kind of weight that told me she trusted me with everything she was. Her breathing would change when I played for her. It would slow, deepen, like the music was pulling her somewhere safe, somewhere the world couldn't reach. Her fingers would trace lazy circles on my knee, drawing patterns only she understood. Small gestures that meant everything. "Your music makes me feel found," she told me once. Not safe. Found, like she'd been wandering her whole life and finally stumbled into the place she was meant to be. I didn't deserve to be that place for anyone. I knew that even then. But God, I wanted to be worthy of it. Worthy of her. The way she listened wasn't passive. She didn't just hear the notes. She absorbed them, lived inside them. Sometimes I'd glance over mid-phrase and catch her with her eyes closed, lips slightly parted, completely lost in whatever world the melody was building around her. Those were the moments I understood what music was actually for. Not performance. Not applause. Not the standing ovations I'd receive at charity galas, or the hollow compliments from people who couldn't tell bark from background noise. Music existed for her expression in those quiet hours. For the way her breath caught when I found a chord that surprised her. For the small sound she'd make in her throat when a phrase moved her. Marlena was 8 months pregnant the night I played it for her. I was 29 years old, drunk on a kind of happiness I never trusted myself to hold, foolish enough to believe the universe would let me keep it. She sat in the leather armchair by the window of our bedroom, moonlight spilling across her shoulders, her belly round and perfect beneath the soft cotton of her nightgown. And those eyes, amber, warm, catching the lamplight like honey held up to the sun. My chest physically ached every time I looked at her, a sharp, sweet pain I never wanted to heal from. "I have something for you," I told her. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Nervous, like a schoolboy confessing his first crush. She tilted her head, a smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Another song?" Not just any song. I pulled the piano bench closer to where she sat. "This one is different. This one took me 6 weeks, every stolen hour between board meetings, every late night after you fell asleep." Her expression shifted. Curious now. Intent. "This one," I said, "is for both of you." I positioned my fingers on the keys, took a breath that felt like prayer, and I played. The melody started soft, tentative, a lullaby wrapped inside a love letter. The opening phrases were gentle questions, notes that wondered if they deserved to exist, if they were allowed to hope. Then the chorus swelled, confident now, declaring something too big for words, the kind of love that terrifies you because losing it would mean losing yourself entirely. I watched her from the corner of my eye as I played. Her lips parted first. Then her hand moved slowly to her chest. By the time I reached the bridge, the part I had written specifically for our unborn child, tears were streaming down her cheeks. She pressed her palm against her mouth, trying to hold herself together, failing beautifully. The bridge was everything I couldn't say out loud. Every fear about becoming a father. Every promise I wanted to make but didn't have words for. Every desperate hope that this child would know somehow how completely wanted he was. The final notes hung in the air between us. Suspended, sacred. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then Marlena reached for me, pulled my hand to her belly, and right on cue, like he'd been listening the whole time, our son kicked against my palm. A secret knock, just for us. "He knows," she whispered. "He already knows his father's heart." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed completely. "Promise me something." Her voice was fierce now, urgent. "Promise me you'll play this for him when he's old enough to understand, when he's a man, when he needs to know how much he was loved before he even took his first breath." I looked into her eyes, amber and infinite. "I promise." I meant it. God help me. I meant every single word. Over the following weeks, I played it for her again and again. She would ask for it each evening, sometimes twice. She said it helped her sleep, said the baby would settle whenever he heard the opening notes, as if he was already learning to recognize his father's voice through music. I caught her once, sitting at the piano while I was supposed to be in a meeting. She wasn't playing, just looking at the sheet music I'd left on the stand, her finger tracing the notes the way she traced patterns on my knee. "I'm memorizing it," she admitted when she noticed me watching, "in case I ever need to remember." I laughed, asked her why she'd ever need to remember when I could play it for her anytime she wanted. She just smiled. That mysterious smile she had sometimes, the one that suggested she knew things I didn't. "Humor me," she said. "A mother knows when something matters." So I let her study the pages, let her hum the phrases until she knew every note, every dynamic, every breath. I thought it was beautiful, this need she had to hold on to something I'd created. I didn't know she was preparing for a future where I wouldn't be there to play it myself. I didn't know she was building a bridge for our son to find his way back to me. That was 25 years ago. I buried that melody in the same grave where I buried my heart. After she was gone, the sheet music went into my grandmother's porcelain music box. Delicate roses painted on aged ceramic, an heirloom that had survived 3 generations. The melody seemed to belong there, wrapped in family history. I locked the box in the safe behind a painting in my private study, a tomb for something too precious to destroy and too painful to revisit. The combination was her birthday, 6 numbers I would never forget. I never played the melody again, never hummed it in the shower, never let my fingers wander toward those chords during late nights alone at the piano. Some doors, once closed, must stay closed. Otherwise, the grief behind them will swallow you whole. 25 years of silence. 25 years of pretending that melody never existed. 25 years of building walls so thick I forgot there was ever anything on the other side. Until tonight. The Ashford Foundation Gala. 300 guests in designer gowns and tailored suits. Crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across the ballroom of my family's estate. The annual performance of wealth and philanthropy I had perfected into an art form. I stood near the bar, whiskey in hand, half listening to a senator drone about tax incentives while my mind wandered somewhere far away. The evening's entertainment had been arranged by my assistant, a scholarship recipient from some music conservatory, young, talented, the kind of background performer who creates atmosphere without demanding attention. I hadn't paid attention to the details, hadn't even glanced at the stage where a young man in a modest suit played jazz standards and light classical pieces. Background noise for people who couldn't tell Bach from elevator music. The senator was explaining something about legislative changes when the melody shifted. It started subtly, a transition that shouldn't have mattered, but something in the phrasing caught my attention. A familiar turn, a progression I recognized in my bones. Then the opening phrase began, soft, tentative, like a question being asked in the dark. The whiskey glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Because I knew this melody, knew it the way I knew my own heartbeat. It was my composition, the one I'd written for Marlena and our unborn son. The one locked in a safe that hadn't been opened in 25 years. The one that existed nowhere else in the world except on 3 pages of aging staff paper. 3 pages that were still locked behind a painting in my study. So how was a stranger playing every note with perfect precision? Time fractured around the melody. The senator's voice became distant static. The crowd blurred into watercolor shapes. The whole world narrowed to those notes spilling from the piano at the far end of the ballroom. It was perfect. Every nuance, every dynamic, every small rubato I'd agonized over during those 6 weeks of composition. The young pianist played it like he'd been practicing for years, like the music lived inside him the way it had once lived inside me. The lullaby at the heart of it, sweet and simple. The love letter wrapped around it, declaring things too large for words. The bridge that had cost me 3 sleepless nights to perfect. Each phrase was a knife sliding between my ribs, My body moved without conscious thought. My legs carried me through the crowd, while my mind reeled. People spoke to me as I passed. Hands reached out. I didn't see or hear any of it. The piano sat on a raised platform near the ballroom's edge. The young pianist had his eyes closed, lost in the music. His fingers moved across the keys with a tenderness that suggested deep familiarity with the piece. As I climbed the platform steps, something else struck me, something beyond the impossible fact of the melody itself. The way he held his shoulders, the tilt of his head, the particular curve of his fingers on the keys. The final notes hung in the air. The pianist opened his eyes, preparing to transition to something else, and looked directly at me. The world stopped. Those eyes, brown with flecks of amber, not exactly Marlena's, but carrying something of them, some quality of depth and warmth that hit me like a physical blow. The young man's expression shifted from peaceful concentration to surprise, then wariness. He recognized something in my face, the destruction barely held together by expensive clothes. "Mr. Ashford," he said, standing quickly, "it's an honor to perform at your event. Where did you learn that song?" The question came out raw, desperate, nothing like the controlled voice I'd spent decades perfecting. The pianist's expression flickered through confusion, then caution. He took a small step backward. "My mother taught it to me, when I was young." "Who is your mother?" Too direct, too urgent. I saw his shoulders tense, his weight shift toward escape. I should return to playing. The agency was specific about continuous music during the cocktail hour. That song wasn't on any set list. I grabbed his arm before I could stop myself. The contact lasted only a second before I forced myself to let go. "Forgive me, I haven't been well, but you need to understand that melody. I wrote it 25 years ago for my wife. No one else has ever heard it. It exists only on pages locked in my safe." The pianist stared at me for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in his professional composure revealing something underneath. "My name is Seren Vance," he said quietly. "I don't know what you're talking about. My mother taught me many pieces when I was young. This was one of them. She said it was special, that I should play it when I felt lost. That's all I know." But his hands were shaking. He turned back to the piano before I could respond. His fingers found the keys and began something else. A Chopin nocturne. Safe. Classical. Nothing that could shatter a man's sanity. I stood frozen on the platform. 300 guests continued their conversations below, oblivious to the earthquake that had just cracked open my world. Because he was lying. The tremor in his voice. The way he'd said his mother's name. The careful distance in his answer. He knew more than he was saying, and I was going to find out what. "Let me ask you something before we go any further. Have you ever lost someone and held onto something of theirs? A song they loved that you can't hear without your chest tightening? A voicemail you refuse to delete, even though you've memorized every pause and breath? A piece of clothing tucked in the back of your closet because it still carries the faintest trace of their scent? Maybe it's a photograph you've looked at so many times the edges have worn soft, or a handwritten note folded and refolded until the creases are ready to tear, or a place you can't visit anymore because they're everywhere and nowhere all at once. If you have something like that, then you already understand why my world just cracked down the middle. You understand why hearing that melody from a stranger's hands felt like watching someone break into the most sacred room of my soul and turn on all the lights. Some things aren't meant to be shared. They're meant to be guarded, protected, kept safe in the dark where grief can hold them without interference. But what happens when the universe refuses to let you hide anymore? What happens when the very thing you buried comes clawing its way back to the surface? That's the question I was about to face, and the answer would take me places I never expected to go, through secrets and betrayals, through lies that stretched back decades, through a conspiracy that would make me question everyone I ever trusted. If this story moves you the way I believe it will, subscribe to this channel, not for my sake, for yours, because what comes next will answer questions you don't even know you're asking yet. Stay with me. Before the tragedy, before the silence, before the decades of grief that would hollow me out like a rotting tree. I was a man who had everything and wanted none of it. At 27, I was heir to one of the oldest fortunes in the country. A dynasty built by my great-grandfather through railroads and banking, expanded by every generation since into an empire that touched shipping, real estate and technology. My father had just died. Heart attack at 63, quick and merciless, the way the old man had lived his entire life. Now, I sat at the head of a company that employed 12,000 people across 3 continents. Shareholders looked to me for guidance. Board members awaited my decisions. The financial press speculated endlessly about my first major move. But I had a secret. I didn't want any of it. The boardroom suffocated me. The endless meetings, the profit margins, the cold calculus of quarterly earnings. Every hour spent reviewing contracts felt like a small death. What I wanted was the piano, my secret passion, the thing I hid from shareholders and business partners like a shameful addiction. While the world saw a calculating executive making billion-dollar decisions with surgical precision, I spent every stolen moment with my fingers on ivory keys, composing melodies no one would ever hear. My father had known about this weakness, had discovered me composing late one night when I was supposed to be studying acquisition reports. "Music is a hobby," the old man had said, "not a legacy. You are an Ashford. Start acting like one." And I, dutiful son that I was, had buried my true self beneath the weight of expectation, became the man my father demanded, until I met someone who saw through the mask. The charity art exhibition was the kind of event I attended out of obligation, another night of pretending to appreciate abstract paintings while counting the minutes until I could leave. I stood in front of a canvas covered in violent red streaks, holding champagne I wouldn't drink. "You're looking at it wrong." The voice came from beside me, soft, amused. I turned and forgot how to breathe. She was 26 years old, dark hair pulled back in a simple twist, a dress that cost less than my watch but made her look like royalty, and those eyes, amber, warm, the color of afternoon sunlight through honey. "I'm sorry," I managed. "The painting, you're trying to understand it with your head, but this artist doesn't paint thoughts, she paints feelings." She stepped closer to the canvas, and I caught the scent of vanilla and something floral. "See how the red isn't just one color, dozens of shades layered on top of each other, crimson, scarlet, vermilion. The artist's mother died of cancer. This is her rage at the disease, at herself for not being there more." She spoke with genuine passion, real connection to the work. "How do you know all this?" She smiled. "I'm Marlena. I work at a gallery downtown, a tiny place you've never heard of. I talked my way into this event because I wanted to see these pieces up close." She didn't know who I was. Wasn't angling for an introduction to the Ashford heir. She was just a woman who loved art, talking to a stranger who looked lost. We talked for 3 hours that night. By the time the evening ended, I knew my life had shifted on its axis. She handed me her card. Simple, unadorned. "Call me if you ever want to look at art the right way again." I called her the next morning. The wedding was small. 30 guests in a garden venue. Marlena had refused my offers of grandeur. "I'm not marrying the Ashford fortune," she told me the night I proposed. "I'm marrying the man who plays piano when he thinks no one's listening, the one who cries at the ending of old movies, the one you hide from everyone else." She'd discovered my music 3 months into our relationship, found me at the piano, playing a melody I'd written years ago but never shared. I stopped immediately, embarrassed. "Play it again, please." So I did, and she cried. "Why would you hide this?" she asked. "This is who you are." No one had ever said that to me before. Our first year of marriage was everything I hadn't known I needed. Morning coffee in bed, arguments about paint colors, late-night conversations that lasted until dawn. I started delegating more at work, trusting my brother Dominic with responsibilities I'd once guarded jealously. Some board members worried I was going soft. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I had something more important than the company. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, everything changed again. Marlena had been feeling sick for weeks. The pregnancy test was supposed to rule out the possibility. Instead, 2 pink lines appeared. I remember dropping to my knees in our bathroom, pressing my forehead against her still flat stomach, overwhelmed by joy so complete it felt like drowning in light. A son, the ultrasound revealed weeks later, healthy and strong. We painted the nursery sage green, bought tiny clothes that made my chest tight, discussed names late into the night until we found one that felt right. I was becoming someone new, someone with everything to lose. 6 weeks before the due date, I began composing in secret. I stole hours between board meetings, rose at 4 in the morning while Marlena slept. The melody came in fragments at first, a phrase here, a chord progression there. Then one night, it all came together. The opening notes mimicked a heartbeat, steady. Sure, the main theme was gentle as breath, sweet as the feeling in my chest when I watched Marlena sleep. The middle section swelled with hope, major keys climbing like sunrise. I imagined my son's first steps while writing this part. First words, first day of school. The bridge was the hardest. This was where I poured out everything I couldn't say aloud. My fears about being a father. My promise to never make my son feel like an heir instead of a human being. I wrote it on staff paper, old-fashioned, permanent. Black ink on cream paper, every note precise. When it was finished, I sat back and looked at what I'd created. 3 pages that somehow captured everything I felt but couldn't express. I planned to keep playing it for her until our son was born. And then for him, every year on his birthday, until he was old enough to understand what it meant. I didn't know I was writing my last love letter. The night everything shattered began with my brother. Dominic was 32 and had spent his entire life in my shadow. The second son, the backup heir. Our father had made his preference clear from childhood. I got the piano lessons. Dominic got accounting textbooks. I got praise for mediocrity. Dominic got criticism for excellence. When our father died and left the company to me, something inside my brother changed. I saw it in quiet moments, a sharpness behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. That evening, he came to my house unannounced. Contract signatures, he explained, holding up a leather portfolio. The Singapore acquisition. The board wants everything finalized tonight. I was distracted. An overseas call with Tokyo partners demanded my attention. The documents are in my study, I said, covering the phone. I'll sign when I'm done. Dominic disappeared down the hallway. The study door clicked shut. He was in there for nearly an hour. At the time, I thought nothing of it. My brother often handled paperwork. What I didn't know was that Dominic had memorized my safe combination 2 years earlier. I'd given it to him during a stressful merger, when documents needed retrieving while I traveled. What I didn't know was that while I discussed profit margins with Tokyo, my brother was removing 3 pages of handwritten music from my grandmother's porcelain box. The melody that was supposed to stay secret forever. He took the originals, photographed them as well with a small camera he'd brought specifically for this purpose, then locked everything back up as if nothing had happened. When Dominic emerged from the study, his face showed nothing unusual. "Everything's ready for your signature," he said. "I'll wait." I nodded, still focused on my call. If I'd looked closer, I might have noticed the slight tremor in his hands. If I'd paid attention, I might have seen the guilt already eating at his edges. But I didn't look. I didn't see. And by the next night, it would be too late to change anything. After Dominic left, after the contracts were signed and the Tokyo call finally ended, I found Marlena in the living room, 8 months pregnant, moving carefully now. She'd arranged herself on the sofa with pillows supporting her back, her hand resting on her belly. "Can't sleep again?" I asked, sitting beside her. "Your son is practicing gymnastics in there." She smiled, but I could see the exhaustion beneath it. "I think he inherited your insomnia. Let me play for you. It might help." She nodded, her eyes already softening. I moved to the piano and played our song. The room filled with music, soft at first, like a whispered secret, then building, swelling, becoming something larger than the sum of its notes. I watched Marlena as I played. Her eyes closed. Her breathing deepened. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she was smiling. When I reached the bridge, she gasped softly, movement beneath her nightgown. The baby responding to music meant for him. The final notes faded into silence. "Promise me something," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Promise you'll play this for him when he's old enough to understand." I moved back to the sofa, pulled her carefully against me. "I promise." She lifted my hand to her belly. A kick, strong and sure. "He knows your music," she whispered. "He already knows your heart." We stayed like that for an hour, not speaking, not needing to. Neither of us knew these were our final hours together. The next evening, while I was at the office reviewing merger documents, Dominic returned to my house. But he didn't come to see me. He came for Marlena. He brought photographs, fabricated evidence of an affair I'd never had, forged correspondence with a woman I'd never met, a story designed with surgical precision to break the heart of a pregnant woman. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Before the baby comes, before it's too late to make decisions." Marlena, 8 months pregnant and not thinking clearly, believed him. He was my brother. Why would he lie about something like that? When Dominic offered to drive her to my office so she could confront me, she agreed. She wanted to see my face when she asked about the other woman, wanted to know if the man she loved was really a lie. So she got in his car, and he drove her away from the city, onto dark roads that led nowhere she needed to go. The call came at 2:17 a.m. I was still at the office. The Singapore acquisition had hit a snag. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Sometimes I wonder how different my life would be if I'd made that choice, if I'd stayed ignorant for just a few more hours. But I answered. "Mr. Ashford, this is Dr. Reeves from Mercy General Hospital." The words that followed broke apart in my memory. Fragments that never assembled into coherent sentences. Accident, severe trauma, emergency surgery, complications, did everything we could, need you to come immediately. So sorry for your loss. Both of them. The drive to the hospital existed only in pieces. Red lights that meant nothing. My hands shaking violently. The speedometer climbing past 90. The emergency room. Too bright. Too loud. Dr. Reeves appeared. Blood on her scrubs. "Your wife suffered massive internal bleeding. The trauma was catastrophic. We performed an emergency cesarean, but the baby had been without oxygen too long." The baby. My son. The child who'd kicked against my palm just hours ago. There was nothing more we could do. My legs gave out. Someone caught me, led me to a chair. They asked questions. Did I want to see her? Did I have family to call? I couldn't answer, couldn't speak. Everything that mattered was gone. The music inside me went silent. They let me see her. A nurse led me through double doors into the ICU. The walk felt both endless and too quick. Marlena lay surrounded by machines that had already given up. They'd left them running for my benefit, to give me time to say goodbye to something that looked like my wife but wasn't anymore. Her face was wrong, too pale, too still. The swell of her belly was gone, flattened, empty. I reached for her hand, still warm but cooling. I tried to speak, to say goodbye, to apologize for not being there. Nothing came out but a sound that wasn't quite human. I collapsed beside the bed, gripping her hand, trying to memorize the feeling before it was gone forever. Someone sedated me. The last thing I remembered was her hand slipping from my grasp. When I woke up 12 hours later, she was already gone. The funeral arrangements had begun without me. My brother Dominic had handled everything. The doctors had names for what happened to me afterward. Acute stress disorder, complicated grief, major depression with psychotic features, words that tried to contain something too vast for language, 10 years in rehabilitation facilities, moving from one to another when the previous stopped working. The Ashford fortune buying the best care money could offer. None of it touched the hollow place inside me. I stopped playing piano, stopped composing, stopped listening to music entirely. I couldn't bear to open the safe, couldn't bear to look at the melody I'd written. It stayed locked away, and I changed the combination twice over the years, paranoid that the pain inside might somehow escape if anyone else found it. Dominic took over the company, stepped smoothly into the role of CEO. The board approved unanimously. Someone had to lead, and I was in no condition to make decisions. For a decade, I existed but didn't live, breathed but didn't feel, woke each morning disappointed to find myself still alive. The medication helped eventually, dulled the edges enough to function. But some wounds don't heal. They just learn to hide better. 25 years passed. 25 years of silence where music used to live. I had returned to the company eventually, not out of desire, but because empty hours were harder to bear than board meetings. Dominic and I shared leadership now, an uneasy partnership built on grief and necessity. I dated occasionally. Beautiful women who wanted my money or my status. None of them lasted. None of them could compete with a ghost. I even returned to the piano eventually. Small steps over many years. A scale here. A chord progression there. Nothing that mattered. Nothing that meant anything. The melody stayed locked away. I'd changed the safe combination twice since the funeral. Different numbers now. Nothing connected to her birthday. I couldn't risk anyone finding those 3 pages. They were all I had left of that night. At 54, I was a ghost wearing an expensive suit, taking medication every morning, attending therapy every Thursday, going through the motions of a life I'd never asked to continue living. And then a young man sat at a piano in my family's gala and shattered every wall I had built. Sleep was impossible that night after the gala. I paced my study until dawn, back and forth across Persian rugs, my mind cycling through the same impossible questions. My mother taught it to me. Who was Seren Vance's mother? How had she learned a melody that existed only in my private composition? The safe remained locked behind the painting. I checked 3 times, entering the new combination with shaking fingers. The porcelain music box sat exactly where I'd placed it 25 years ago. I lifted it carefully, opened the delicate lid. Empty. The 3 pages of handwritten music were gone. I searched the rest of the safe's contents. Old photographs of Marlena, legal documents, a pair of her earrings I couldn't give away. But no staff paper, no melody, no evidence that my composition had ever existed. Someone had opened this safe. Someone who knew the old combination from before I'd changed it. Someone who had stolen the only physical copy of the song I'd written for my wife and unborn child. Only one person had ever known that combination besides me, Dominic. The night before the accident, nearly an hour in my study, contract signatures that couldn't wait. Except, there had been no contracts that night. I pulled up the company records, searching through archives that went back decades. No documents were signed, no acquisitions finalized. So what had my brother really been doing behind that closed door? The answer was becoming clear, even if I didn't want to see it. Dominic had stolen the melody. The question was why, and who had he given it to? By 5 a.m., I'd made a decision. I called Marcus Webb, the private investigator who handled sensitive matters for the Ashford family. I need everything you can find on someone named Seren Vance, early 20s, pianist, works through the Harmon Entertainment Agency. When do you need it? Yesterday. 3 days later, Webb sat across from me in my study with a manila folder between us. Seren Vance, 25 years old. Birth certificate shows he was born in Portland, Oregon, raised by a single mother named Elena Vance. His father? No father listed on any documentation. No child support records, no custody agreements. I drummed my fingers against the desk. What else? Here's where it gets interesting. Webb pulled out another document. The birth certificate was filed nearly 2 years after his listed birth date. That happens sometimes, home births, bureaucratic delays. But the address listed for the filing, it's a parking lot, has been since 1987. The room tilted slightly. And the hospital? St. Mary's Medical Center. They have no record of the birth, No record of Elena Vance as a patient, ever. What does that mean? It means someone created an identity for him, a good one, but not perfect. Professional work, the kind that costs serious money and requires connections. Webb paused. Mr. Ashford, whoever helped them disappear, didn't want them found. The question is why? Disappear. The word lodged itself in my throat. Because people don't just disappear. They run from something. Or someone. And 25 years ago, someone had run with my melody. I became methodical in my pursuit. 3 more events where I specifically requested Seren Vance as the pianist. A private dinner. A memorial concert for my mother's birthday. A weekend retreat at the family's mountain estate. Each time, I offered triple the standard rate. Each time, I watched Seren's defenses crack a little more. The young man was talented at deflection. When I asked about his childhood, he'd redirect to music theory. When the melody came up, he claimed memory gaps, lies wrapped in half-truths. I recognized the technique. After the 3rd event, I made my move. Let me drive you home. It's late, and these mountain roads can be treacherous. Something shifted in his expression. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Ashford, but I have my own car, and my mother worries if I'm not back when expected. You live with your mother? A pause, precisely measured. She hasn't been well. I prefer to stay close. I'd love to meet her sometime. Any woman who raised such a talented musician must be extraordinary. The silence stretched between us. She's very private. The illness has made her fragile. He left quickly after that, but not before glancing back 3 times. In the driveway, illuminated by security lights, I saw him pull out his phone and make a call before driving away. He was warning someone. 2 months of patience led to 1 night of action. I followed Seren's modest Honda through 40 minutes of Portland traffic, past downtown, through suburbs, into a neighborhood of small houses and chain-link fences. The house was unremarkable. 2-story, beige siding, a garden that showed care but not wealth, a porch light that flickered like it needed attention. I parked at the corner and watched. Seren went inside. Lights bloomed in the front window. Then the kitchen. Shadows moved behind curtains. Domestic, normal. An hour passed. My hands cramped from gripping the steering wheel. Then the front door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch. The streetlight was behind her, turning her into a silhouette, but something about her posture stopped my heart. The way she tilted her head. The gesture when she reached up to tuck hair behind her ear. The particular grace in how she moved. 25 years disappeared in an instant. I was out of my car before conscious thought engaged, running toward the house, my dress shoes slipping on wet pavement, my breath coming in gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. I pounded on the door. Hello? Please, I just need to speak with you. I just need to understand. A curtain twitched. Someone watching. I knocked again. Harder. Desperate. Please, I know you're in there. I know who you are. The lights went out, one by one. First, the living room. Then, the kitchen. Then the porch light, leaving me in darkness. I stood there for another hour, waiting, hoping, dying by degrees. She was alive. After 25 years of grief, she was alive, and she was hiding from me. I drove home that night with something broken open inside me. I'd seen enough to know I wasn't crazy, but not enough to understand why the woman I'd mourned for 25 years was still breathing. For 3 days, I tried to convince myself I'd been wrong. The woman on the porch was just someone who moved like Marlena. Grief was a lens that distorted reality. My therapist had warned me about this, but the melody existed. Someone had taught Seren that song. Someone who knew every note, every phrase, every emotional turn that I had poured into those 3 pages. That wasn't projection. That was fact. I pulled out Webb's investigation file again. Elena Vance. No history before she appeared in Portland with a young child and enough money to start a new life. The timeline mattered. Seren was 25. Born shortly after Marlena's supposed death. If those documents were fabricated, if his birth was actually earlier than claimed, 25 years ago, Marlena had been 8 months pregnant. The math was impossible to ignore. The death certificate said both mother and child had died from trauma. But death certificates could be faked. Bodies could be misidentified in a closed casket funeral. And my brother had been handling everything while I was catatonic in a psychiatric ward. I started digging through old company records, board meeting minutes from 25 years ago, financial statements, personnel changes. There, 3 weeks after Marlena's death, Dominic had authorized a payment from his personal accounts to something called Discretionary Security Services. $200,000. No invoice attached. No explanation of services rendered. More payments followed over the years. Smaller amounts, but regular. Monthly transfers that continued for over a decade. I recognized the pattern. I'd seen it in hostile takeovers and corporate espionage. Hush money. My brother had been paying someone to stay quiet for 25 years. The suspicion spread through my mind like ink in water. 25 years ago, my brother had been struggling. Vice president in title, but secretary in practice. Our father's will had made the hierarchy clear. I got the company. Dominic got a lifetime of playing second. Then came the accident. How convenient for him. His brother destroyed by grief. 10 years in psychiatric facilities. Another decade learning to function. And all that time, Dominic had the company to himself. He'd thrived in my absence. Doubled the company's value. Became the Ashford heir our father had always wanted me to be. But success built on tragedy always has cracks if you know where to look. Had Dominic known about the accident before it happened? Had he arranged it? Was Marlena's death really an accident at all? The melody returning after 25 years wasn't just a ghost story. It was evidence. Evidence that my brother had built an empire on lies. Dominic was waiting in my living room that evening, sitting in the leather chair like he owned it, whiskey in hand, the picture of casual authority. "You look terrible," he said. "The board is beginning to express concerns." I studied my younger brother, 62 now. Success had softened him physically, but sharpened him in other ways. "Since when is my health a board matter?" "Since you started behaving erratically. Following musicians around the city, parking outside strangers' houses at night." He took a measured sip. "The last thing this family needs is another episode." Episode. The word tasted bitter. "You mean another decade of me conveniently out of the way while you run everything?" Dominic's smile was practiced, political. "I've protected this family's interests during your difficulties. Some gratitude might be appropriate." Gratitude. I moved to the bar, poured myself water. "Tell me, brother, that night 25 years ago, you were at my house, in my study, nearly an hour. Do you remember?" A flicker, just for an instant, something shifting behind his careful expression. "It was a long time ago. I don't recall the specifics." "You were there the night before the accident, alone, with access to everything. What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm just reconstructing that timeline, trying to understand what happened." Dominic set down his glass and stood. His movements were controlled, but I caught the tension underneath. "Be very careful, Cale. Digging up the past has a way of disturbing things better left buried. Some truths destroy more than they reveal." "Is that a threat?" "It's brotherly advice. You've been stable for years now. It would be a shame to see you relapse." He left without another word. I stood alone, understanding with perfect clarity that my brother was afraid. More than that, he was dangerous. 6 weeks of silence followed. I continued my investigation quietly, gathering evidence, building a case that I wasn't sure anyone would believe. The payments from Dominic's accounts, the falsified identity documents for Elena and Seren Vance, the timeline that suggested my wife and son had survived an accident everyone claimed had killed them. Then, an envelope arrived, hand-delivered, no postmark. Inside, a simple invitation to a charity showcase for young musicians. Saturday evening. A community center in the neighborhood where I'd followed Seren. The kind of modest event that would never normally cross my radar. But the handwriting made my hands shake. I knew that writing. had love letters in that same careful script, had watched those hands write grocery lists and birthday cards and notes tucked into my briefcase. At the bottom, 5 words. Please come, it's time. No signature needed. I later learned what had prompted her decision. Seren had told her about my persistent questions, about the way I looked at him, about my claim that I had written the melody she'd taught him. She knew I was close to the truth. She knew Dominic would eventually realize the same thing. After 25 years of hiding, the walls were closing in. If the truth was coming out anyway, she wanted to control how. She wanted to see me one more time before everything shattered. The community center was humble. Folding chairs arranged in crooked rows. A small stage with borrowed equipment. Parents clutching phones to record their children. A world away from the Ashford Foundation galas, Seren was the featured performer. His technique was flawless. His interpretation mature beyond his years. But I wasn't listening to the music. I was watching the door. She entered during the second piece. Same silver-threaded hair, now where it had once been dark. Same careful posture. Same amber eyes that had haunted a quarter-century of dreams. Our gazes met across the crowded room. Everything else disappeared. Seren finished his piece, followed his mother's stare, saw me. His face drained of color. "Mom, what's happening? Why is he here?" Marlena was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the man she'd loved and left. The room began to notice. Heads turning, whispers spreading. Marlena's composure cracked. She turned and fled through a side door, unable to face the collision she'd arranged. Seren's voice cut through the chaos. "Who are you? What did you do to her?" I looked at the young man, my son, the baby who'd kicked against my palm. Alive, grown, glaring at me with eyes that carried both parents' fire. I whispered, "I'm your father." I ran after her. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, carrying me out of the community center and into the cool night air. The parking lot was half empty, pools of yellow light from overhead lamps creating islands of visibility in the darkness. And there she was, backed against an old sedan, chest heaving, 25 years of hiding crumbling in her eyes. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile in a way Marlena had never been. Time had carved lines into her face, threaded silver through her hair, bent her posture into something defensive and watchful. But it was her. God help me. It was really her. "You were supposed to stay broken," she said, her voice cracking. "You were supposed to never look." I stopped 3 feet away, afraid that if I got closer, she might shatter. Or I might. Or the whole fragile reality of this moment would collapse. "Marlena." I said her name like a prayer, like a wound reopening. She flinched at the sound. "Don't." Her hand came up, palm out. "Don't say my name like that, like I'm still the person you remember. You're alive." The words came out broken. "You've been alive this whole time. I had to be dead to you." Tears streamed down her face. I had no choice. No choice? Something hot and terrible built in my chest. You let me think you were gone. You let me bury an empty casket. You let me lose my mind while you were out here, living, breathing, raising our son. To protect him. Her voice rose with desperation. Everything I did was to protect him, to protect you. You don't understand what happened. I went very still. Then tell me everything. The story she told dismantled everything I thought I knew. The night before the accident, Dominic had come to her with fabricated evidence. Photographs, forged correspondence, a lie designed to break her heart. "I believed him," she said, her voice hollow with old shame. "He was your brother. Why would he lie? He showed me pictures, emails. He said he was telling me because I deserved to know the truth before the baby came." My hands curled into fists. "There was no affair. There was never anyone but you." "I know that now." She wiped her eyes. But that night, I was devastated, 8 months pregnant, not thinking clearly. When Dominic offered to drive me to your office so I could confront you, I agreed. "So he drove you?" "Yes." And the accident? Marlena's face went pale. It wasn't an accident, Cale. It was never an accident. The truth came out in fragments. Dominic had been planning it for months. He'd spent his entire life in my shadow. When our father left the company to me, something inside him finally snapped, but he was patient. He knew killing me outright would invite scrutiny, so he chose a different approach. Destroy me from the inside out. Take away my wife, my child. Send me spiraling into grief so profound I'd never recover, never be fit to run the company, never stand in the way of his ambitions. The crash was meant to kill Marlena and the baby both. The car went off the road, she said, barely audible. I remember the impact, the glass breaking, and then nothing. How did you survive? I don't know. The doctors said it was a miracle, but Dominic had arranged for people to be waiting. When the crash didn't kill me outright, his people got there before the real paramedics. They took me to a private facility, different name on my chart, different city. And the funeral? A closed casket. Dominic told the hospital I'd been burned beyond recognition, told them you were too fragile to see the body. He bribed officials, created false records. By the time you were coherent enough to ask questions, I'd been buried for weeks. I felt sick. The elaborate machinery of deception. The money it must have cost. The people who had to be silenced. The baby was born while I was unconscious, she continued. Premature but alive. They kept us both sedated for months while I healed. When I finally woke up, Dominic came to my room. What did he say? Her eyes went dark with old fear. He laid out the terms. I could disappear, take the baby, start a new life with the identity documents he'd prepared. He'd give me enough money to survive, and in exchange, I would stay dead forever. Or he'd finish what he started, and this time, he wouldn't leave survivors. The magnitude of what my brother had done was crushing. Not just the crash, not just the lies. The entire architecture of my grief had been manufactured. Every tear I'd shed, every night I'd spent screaming, every year lost to hospitals and medications, and the belief that I would never be whole again. All of it orchestrated by the man who'd sat at my bedside and pretended to mourn with me. I died to keep him alive, Marlena said, looking toward the community center. I died so Dominic would leave us alone. 25 years of hiding. 25 years of watching our son grow up without a father because I was too afraid of what would happen if I told the truth. The melody, I managed. How did you really know every note? Something shifted in her face, pain mixed with tenderness. You played it for me so many times in those final weeks, every evening, sometimes twice. And I studied the sheet music while you were at work, remember? I told you I was memorizing it. I remembered. The morning I'd found her at the piano, tracing the notes. In case I ever need to remember, she'd said. She'd been preparing even then. Some part of her had known something was coming. I taught it to Seren from the time he was old enough to sit at a piano, she continued. I told him his father had composed it before he died, a gift from a ghost. But he played it at my gala. Of all the events in the city, he played it there. She was quiet for a long moment. That wasn't coincidence, she admitted. I arranged for him to get that job. I'd been watching you for months, Cale. Watching you heal. Watching you return to life. Part of me wanted to reach out, but I was still afraid, so I sent the melody instead. I thought maybe, if you heard it, you'd start asking questions. I didn't expect it to happen so fast. You wanted me to find you. I wanted you to have a chance to find us, without putting Seren at risk if you weren't ready. I stared at her. At the elaborate game she'd been playing. At the courage it must have taken to send our son into the lion's den with only a melody as protection. I'm ready now, I said. I've been ready for 25 years. She reached for my hand. The first time we'd touched in a quarter century. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but real, alive. Can we pause here for a moment? Have you ever felt grief so heavy it broke something inside you? Something you didn't even know could break? If you have, then you understand what's happening in this story. Cale didn't just lose his wife and child. He lost the man he was supposed to become. He lost 25 years to a lie. And now he's standing in a parking lot, holding the hand of a woman who was supposed to be dead, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that was stolen from him. Drop a comment below if you've ever carried that kind of weight. Let me know I'm not alone in feeling this story. And if this is hitting different for you, share it with someone who needs to feel less alone in their pain. We're just getting started. Dominic Ashford was arrested 4 days later. The charges were extensive: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, witness intimidation. 25 years of ongoing payments to maintain a cover-up constituted continuing criminal activity, bypassing any statute of limitations issues. Marlena's testimony was crucial, but it wasn't the only evidence. The financial records I'd uncovered, Webb's investigation into the falsified identity documents, bank records showing payments to the same security consultants who had intercepted Marlena after the crash. One of those consultants, facing charges of his own, agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. He provided details that corroborated everything Marlena had told me. The trial would take years, but for now, Dominic sat in a cell, his empire crumbling around him. I visited him once, 3 days after his arrest. He looked smaller behind the glass. The confidence stripped away. The careful politician's mask finally cracked. "You destroyed everything," he said. "The company, the family name, everything I built." "You destroyed it yourself," I replied. 25 years ago. I made this family great. While you were rotting in hospitals, I turned a regional company into a global empire. That should count for something. It counts for nothing. Not against what you took from me." He leaned forward, a flash of the old sharpness in his eyes. "I gave you exactly what you would have done to me. Obscurity, the knowledge that you don't matter. No, I stood to leave. You gave me something else. You gave me a reason to come back, a reason to keep fighting. If you just let me live my life, I might have faded into comfortable irrelevance. But you made me a widower, a grieving father, and that grief kept me going when nothing else could." I paused at the door. "So thank you, brother, for making me strong enough to destroy you." I walked out and never saw him again. The hardest conversations weren't with Dominic. They were with Seren. My son had spent 25 years believing a story about himself. His father was dead. His mother was a widow. Their small, quiet life was all there was. Now everything he knew had been revealed as a lie. We met at a coffee shop 3 weeks after Dominic's arrest. A small place on a quiet street, far from the glittering venues where I usually spent my time. Seren was already there when I arrived. Arms crossed, posture defensive. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I sat down across from my son. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me. Mom asked me to." His voice was flat, guarded. "She said I should hear what you have to say. That's more than I deserve." Silence stretched between us. "Mom told me everything," Seren said finally. "About Dominic, about the crash, about why she ran." He paused. "She said you didn't know, that you thought she was dead this whole time." "I did. For 25 years. Yes." Seren looked away. "I grew up thinking you were a ghost story, this tragic figure my mother loved and lost. She'd tell me about you sometimes late at night. The man who wrote music like breathing. The man who promised to play a melody for his son someday." My throat tightened. "I meant that promise." "I know." His voice cracked slightly. "That's the messed up part. I know you meant it, and I know none of this was your fault, but I still—" He stopped, struggling. "I still don't know how to do this. You're not a ghost story anymore. You're real. You're sitting across from me, and I have no idea what I'm supposed to feel." "You don't have to feel anything specific." I leaned forward carefully. "You don't owe me forgiveness or affection or even understanding. I'm not here to demand anything." "Then why are you here?" The question hung in the air. "Because I wanted to see you, to tell you that I'm sorry." "Sorry for what? You didn't know I existed." I should have asked more questions, should have pushed harder, should have refused to believe your mother was gone without seeing proof with my own eyes. I let grief swallow me whole, and while I was drowning, you were out here living a life without a father. That's on me. Seren stared at me for a long moment. Then, something in his posture shifted, not relaxing, but loosening. The first crack in the wall. I used to imagine meeting you, he admitted. When I was a kid, I'd make up scenarios. You'd show up at my school or at one of my recitals, and I'd know somehow, this instant recognition like in the movies. Did you? At the Gala? He considered the question. I felt something, when you grabbed my arm and looked at me like I was a ghost. Something inside me knew you weren't just some crazy billionaire. He paused. No one had ever looked at me like that, like I mattered more than anything else in the world. I had to blink back tears. You do matter. You always have. The silence that followed was different, softer, less like a wall and more like a bridge being built. I don't know how to be your son, Seren said. I don't know how to have a father, but maybe we could figure it out together? I nodded, not trusting my voice. I'd like that more than anything. The months that followed were not easy. There were setbacks, days when old wounds reopened without warning. Days when Seren's anger surfaced, or Marlena's guilt overwhelmed her, or I retreated into the silence that had been my companion for so long. Seren struggled the most. He'd spent his entire life as Seren Vance, son of Elena, a young man with no father and no family history. Now he was supposed to become Seren Ashford, heir to a dynasty, son of a billionaire whose face appeared in financial magazines. He didn't want the money, didn't want the name, didn't want any of the things that came with being an Ashford. What he wanted was answers. Why didn't she tell me? He asked me once, 6 months after everything came out. Not about you, about all of it. The danger, the hiding, the reason we moved so often when I was young. She was protecting you. From what? The truth. I spent my whole life wondering why I felt like something was missing. Like there was a hole in my story that I couldn't fill, and she just let me wonder. I didn't have an answer for that. The space between protecting someone and lying to them is razor thin. Marlena had walked that edge for 25 years, and now she was paying for every step. They fought, more than once. Seren would storm out and not speak to her for days. Marlena would call me in tears, asking if she'd lost him forever, but she hadn't, because underneath the anger there was love, the kind that had survived 2 decades of hiding, the kind that had been poured into every lesson she'd taught him, every meal she'd cooked, every late night she'd spent watching him sleep, the kind that doesn't break, no matter how hard you hit it. Slowly, painfully, they found their way back to each other, and slowly, painfully, Seren found his way to me. 1 year after the community center revelation, we gathered in my living room for a private concert. Just the 3 of us, no audience, no expectations, just a family that had clawed its way back from the grave. The grand piano gleamed in the afternoon light. It had been tuned the day before, the first time anyone had played it properly in years. Seren sat at the keys, his fingers hovering over the ivory. "I've been working on something," he said. "A new arrangement. I wanted you both to hear it." He began to play. The melody filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. The same composition I had written 25 years ago, but different now. Fuller, richer. Seren had added harmonies, counter-melodies, layers that transformed the simple lullaby into something symphonic. It was the sound of inheritance, of legacy, of a father's love reshaped by his son's hands. I listened with tears streaming down my face. Halfway through the piece, Seren paused and looked at me. "There's room on the bench," he said quietly. "If you want." I didn't trust myself to speak. I simply rose, crossed the room, and settled beside my son at the piano. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Seren played the opening phrase again, and this time I joined him. 4 hands on the keys, 2 generations playing the same melody, a conversation in music that words could never capture. We played through the verse, the chorus, the bridge I had written for the child I thought I'd never meet. And when we reached the final chord, we let it ring out, filling the room with resonance. Marlena was crying, but these weren't the tears she'd shed for 25 years. Not grief, not fear, something like joy. "You promised," she whispered. "You promised you'd play it for him when he was old enough to understand." I looked at my wife, at my son, at the life I'd been denied, and the second chance I'd never expected. "I keep my promises," I said. Even the ones that take 25 years. Some melodies are meant to be buried, locked away in safes and swallowed by grief, too painful to ever play again. But the best melodies have a way of returning, carried on the hands of children who never knew their composers, echoing through decades of silence, finding their way home, no matter how long the journey takes. That is the truth this story teaches. Betrayal can wear the most familiar faces. The people we trust most can sometimes become our greatest enemies. Dominic didn't look like a villain. He looked like a brother, a partner, a man doing his best. And that's the most dangerous kind of monster, the one who smiles at you across the dinner table. But this story also teaches something else. Grief doesn't have to be the end. Decades of pain, years of believing the worst, a whole lifetime built on lies. All of it can be transformed into something new. I got my family back. Not the family I'd imagined before the tragedy, but a different one. Forged in truth, tempered by time, bound together by a melody that refused to die. Love survived. Through 25 years of separation, through lies and silence, and the kind of darkness that breaks most people beyond repair, love survived. Maybe you've buried something too. A relationship you walked away from, a dream you let die, a person you stopped reaching for because the pain felt endless. Maybe you've spent years believing a story about yourself that wasn't true, living in someone else's shadow, accepting a version of your life that was written by people who didn't have your best interests at heart. If this story proves anything, it's that the ending isn't written yet. Your melody is still there, waiting in the silence, ready to be played again. The question is whether you're brave enough to sit down at the keys. If this story moved you, I want to ask you something. Not for me, for the next person who needs to hear this. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to share this story with someone going through their own darkness, someone who needs to believe second chances are real. Drop a comment telling me what part hit you hardest. Was it the moment I heard the melody at the gala? The confrontation with Dominic? The father and son playing together for the first time? I read every single comment, and your words help me understand what stories matter to you. And if you're not subscribed yet, join this family. We're building something here. A community of people who believe in stories that make you feel something real. Click that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. I'm so grateful you spent this time with me. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, your story isn't over. The best melodies are still waiting to be played.